Welcome to today's show. As always, we are powered by CLNS Media, and today we are brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/LakersNation for an excellent fantasy football experience. We're also brought to you by Baumfeld. Go to Baumfeld.com/LakersNation for some very stylish clothes, and MeUndies. Go to MeUndies.com/LakersNation. You can get 20% off your first order, some high quality underwear, and we'll talk a bit more about those deals later on in the show. Today, I've brought in Jared Weiss of CLNS Media. Now, he covers the Boston Celtics. You may be asking yourselves, why is a Celtics guy coming on a Lakers podcast? But there are some connections that we're going to need to discuss today, especially in light of everything that's going on in the NBA. Jared, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, I'm happy to be in enemy territory.
So this offseason has been just absolutely insane. I mean, not even just the NBA. I suppose the summer in general has been crazy. I mean, both of our towns have kind of gotten in a little bit of hot water here. We've got the Lakers with their tampering charges. We've got the Boston Red Sox caught stealing signs. Hey, all kinds of stuff going on. The Patriots losing their first game of the season. It's absolute madness. How are you keeping up with everything?
Well, the first thing I do is not care about baseball. That makes it much easier. Although, I was just talking to a friend of mine right before that story broke about Apple Watches and the danger of the technology they present and so forth. So that was actually pretty interesting. And actually, Apple's about to announce on Tuesday that they're going to have Apple Watches with their own LTE chip in them. So it'll be even easier to steal signs now. So one thing I never understood is you have to have your phone within like range to steal signs with an Apple Watch. So maybe the Red Sox got a hold of the prototype of the Apple Watch 3 or something like that.
Yeah, maybe they pulled some strings and they were able to get one of those early or something like that. So from the response online, and I know we're going to get to basketball in just a second, but from the response online, it seems like Boston is losing its mind over the Patriots losing their first game. Is that accurate, since you're actually there? Sometimes the online response isn't the same as what's actually going on the streets.
I mean, I think the fires are finally starting to stop now that the riots are over. There's a great schadenfreude that the world enjoys whenever Boston sports are losing, because people just hate Boston sports fans because they're spoiled and they're obnoxious. This was a great combination where you have the Red Sox getting caught with the sign stealing, the Patriots getting killed, which I thought they were going to lose that game. When everybody is saying it's a sure thing that someone's going to win a game, I always pick that they're going to lose that game. So that wasn't surprising at all. Maybe Alex Smith looking like Tom Brady in his prime was a bit of a surprise, but right. Or a rookie running back having 300 yards or so, that was a surprise. But I mean, Boston fans have three of the best teams in each of their leagues. I have no idea if the Bruins are good or not. I don't really care anyway. But the Red Sox are in first place, I believe, and the Patriots have they're Super Bowl favorites. The Celtics look like they're finals contenders. So if you're a Boston sports fan and you look at the long-term picture and you think that there's a problem, you probably need some perspective.
So I play fantasy sports. I'm not sure if you do or not, but I was actually one of my buddies is playing against me, and he has Kareem Hunt, so that definitely hurt because he just absolutely blew up. I got to ask you though, have you checked out FanDuel at all?
I am a FanDueler. I'm putting a team together. I couldn't do it this week because I was traveling, but I'm going to put one together for next week. I'm excited.
Well, that's awesome. They're actually a sponsor of our show. They're a sponsor on our network, and you can go to FanDuel.com/LakersNation if you want. I don't know if you want to join the Lakers FanDuel or not. You can jump in there into enemy territory and be part of the FanDuel experience. I've played in a lot of leagues that are season long, where if you blow it on draft day, you're kind of screwed. You're in trouble for the rest of the season. And the thing I love about FanDuel is that I can make all those mistakes that I tend to make on draft night, and then I can just pick a new team the very next week. Like you said, you didn't get a chance to play this week, and you're going to be playing next week. So would definitely recommend for fans to go check out FanDuel.com/LakersNation. You can play against other Lakers Nation fans, play against our staff members, play against me. We'll be in there competing. Go check it out, FanDuel.com/LakersNation. Jared, hopefully you'll hop in there as well, and we can talk a little trash on the Celtics.
I mean, we can talk trash either way. I don't really care.
So I've got a few topics that I want to get to today in the basketball world. And the first one, when I actually mentioned this to you before we did the show, we were just talking about kind of what we were going to do today. You said that this was one of your favorite topics to discuss, and that is lottery reform or draft lottery reform. It's essentially an anti-tanking plan. It looks like the league is talking about trying to switch up the way the draft lottery is weighted, the way the percentages work, in a hope to kill tanking. So what are your thoughts? I'm guessing you have some pretty strong opinions on this.
Yeah, so I'm very much in favor of this. I've always felt that the lottery system, its flaw wasn't the actual concept of the lottery, which I think is the optimal way to do it. It's the way that they stagger the percentages of your chance to get the top pick. So, like, right now, it's 25% for the number, for, like, the first seed, 19.9% for the second seed, and then the gap gets a little bit smaller as you go down, but, the disparity is pretty massive from, like, 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3 and so forth. So my opinion has always been to basically just close those gaps so that every team has a somewhat legitimate shot of falling up in the top 3, but that the difference between the worst team and the second worst team is almost negligible. And that will still allow for, because the whole point of the lottery system is to create cycles for franchises and create competitive balance, because it's the most important thing for eliminating or at least helping to reduce the disparity between small market teams and big market teams, to help places like Sacramento and Milwaukee compete with places like LA and New York. Or I wouldn't say New York because they haven't had much success in history, but like LA and Golden State, sure. So I think that is, you can't get rid of that. So like there was 3 years ago, I want to say, maybe 4 years ago, Mike Zarin, the assistant GM of the Celtics, who's known as generally the smartest man in basketball, he proposed a system which he was shared with Zach Lowe when he was at Grayland at the time, of this wheel concept, where basically teams would go around a wheel over like a 20-year span or whatever it is, or a 30-year span basically, and they would alternate between having like the top pick and the 30th pick, and they would keep alternating. And I guess it would create like a very clear, delineated like timeline for when your team was supposed to be building up versus competing and so forth. But I wasn't in favor of that because it took away too much of the market mechanics that allows teams to rise and fall, and some teams to sustain it. So you have teams like San Antonio that have been able to, somehow break through because they do great drafting, they make great strategic moves. So I like the way the system is currently now, where it generally benefits the teams that are struggling, but it still allows for, some chance for like decent teams to climb up. But I think it's the teams that are the worst. Like, there's a whole idea of like you should reward winning and trying and so forth. Right. I think if you make it so that the difference, so that like let's say it's 20%. I'm just throwing this number out there as I haven't done the math yet, but we'll say 18% chance at the number 1 pick for the worst team, and then go down to like the 7th worst team, and their chances are like 13 to 14%. The difference is negligible. The math probably doesn't work, but whatever. The point will be that if you get it right, the difference between having the worst record and the 6th worst record will be a slight advantage, so that you still are helping a team that's really struggling, but there's not enough of a difference to really incentivize tanking, because you could try to make a good team and try to get to like 35 wins, but still have a good chance of getting a top pick. That would mean, though, that teams that are really bad and don't win that lottery, they're not getting the talent that they really need to turn it around, so it's going to be harder for them. But that rule that they're considering putting in place, where you can't have a top 3 pick in consecutive years, I think could really help avoid that happening, basically. So if you're bad and you don't get a top pick and then you're bad again, the team that got that top pick next year isn't going to be able to leapfrog you again, so you're still going to have a good chance of getting that top pick. So I think those are the two things that I had always that I always thought would be right. I always thought it should be just the first pick you can't have a couple years in a row, but I think top 3 would make a lot of sense, and I hope that they do add that to the reform package. But I think this is so much better than a wheel, like a fixed system, because there's unpredictability, there's chance, and there's luck, which I think is very important. And it allows for not only increased variability, but it means that teams, if they're screwing up, they don't just get to automatically fall back on having like the second pick guaranteed to them. Like, it incentivizes them to try to succeed more, because there's unpredictability in what compensation they're going to get with their draft pick.
Yeah, I think no matter what you do with the percentages, wherever there's a cutoff, you're going to have teams trying to get into those particular spots, and there's going to be a little bit of manipulation there. But when you've got, I mean, obviously coming from the Lakers' perspective, after getting the second pick 3 years in a row, that would have, if this rule was in place, that would have prevented that from happening, for better or for worse. I did see Daryl Morey, the GM of the Houston Rockets, took to Twitter the other day, and he responded to this whole thing. He said that part of the problem is not that teams are getting picks over and over again, it's that poorly run franchises are getting picks over and over again, and that's why they're staying down at the bottom, because they're poorly run. That if the team was well run, then they wouldn't be staying at the bottom, they would be rising up each year. And I think there is some validity to that if a team is run well, then they can rise up. But again, like you were saying, you kind of have to have that reason to do it, right? I mean, the NBA has created a system where the draft has become the best way to build a team. I mean, they've made it so that teams can hang on to their superstars, and they've made it incredibly difficult to build through free agency and build through trades like you used to be able to. So now you kind of have to build through the draft, and so teams are going to do whatever they can in order to get the highest pick possible. They're going to find a way to game the system as much as they can. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it, because on one hand, I understand that you don't want teams tanking. It's a bad look for the league if you have teams that are just blatantly trying to lose. We had Mark Cuban making some comments about that, about how his team was kind of hoping to lose games. Of course, the Lakers last season went on a 5-game winning streak improbably, and everyone here in Los Angeles was just losing their minds over how they were ruining their draft pick and all that. But then on the flip side, I worry about, what happens if you get that say 35-win team, or, like, for example, let's say Portland. Right, let's say the Portland Trailblazers take a step back, the Western Conference is loaded, let's say they win 35, 36 games, something like that, and then because the percentages have changed, they jump up, and suddenly you're giving a team that's already kind of a bubble playoff team a top pick, and that's happening more frequently. Is that a concern, or can you tweak the percentages to where you just wouldn't have to worry about that so much?
I think it's not a negative thing. I think it's part of the lottery. I mean, if you're a team on the playoff bubble and you have, like, let's say the 14, you're like the last team to miss the playoffs.
Right.
Right now you have, I think, a 0.3% chance or something like that at the number one pick. If you bump that up to 5%, which would probably be around where it is if you're staggering everything more evenly, that's not a huge chance of it happening. It's still pretty unlikely, but it makes it somewhat more viable. But I think that is a result of basically flattening out the system towards the low end to address the real concern. But I mean, it's happened before. I think Cleveland didn't they win when they got Kyrie? They had like the 12th seed. So yeah, I mean that happens, and I think it's good because it shows that it reinforces the unpredictability of a random chance system. So sometimes there's going to be breaks like that. Teams have made the leap. I think the Clippers made the leap a little while back as well, from like the 9 seed or so.
And that was the pick that Cleveland got. They jumped up from the 9 to the 1, and Cleveland got that pick and got Kyrie. And
that's right. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for. I'm impressed you remember that one so clearly. So. You see, you're up way earlier than I am, yet my head is way less clear because I'm still waiting for my coffee to kick in. But so yeah, so I mean I thought that's a real positive for the system because that reinforces the unpredictability of the system, which means you don't. It tells all the teams that are thinking we want to tank and get that first seed that there is precedent, and we understand that it's literally every single time. Precedent doesn't matter because it's a random drawing, so literally history has no bearing on it. It's still completely random, but it just reminds the emotional decision makers that if you're trying to act irrational and you're not just relying on the complete randomness of the situation, it reminds you that there is a chance that things could not go in your favor because it's all probability and nothing is a sure thing. So I think having probability and making it more evenly dispersed amongst all the teams, because really the difference between the worst team and the 5th worst team isn't that big in the long run. It might be in one season, but you look at Brooklyn compared to who had the 5th pick. Was it Orlando that had the 5th pick this year?
Let's see.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So the difference between Brooklyn and Orlando last year was pretty drastic, but over like a 4-year projection, I mean, Brooklyn, I think, might have a better chance of being a good basketball team, in 5 years from now than Orlando has. Like the state of their franchises are not that different, and I think that's something that can't be lost when you look at the long-term picture. That the difference between the worst team in the NBA and the sixth worst team in the NBA every year, over the long term, those teams have a somewhat similar chance of getting out of the bottom of the league and getting to the playoffs eventually.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, Orlando did have the sixth seed. That's where they...
Oh, Sacramento.
Sacramento had 5 because they got De'Aaron Fox with that, and then Jonathan Isaac went 6 to Orlando. So,
well, there is almost no difference between the Brooklyn Nets and the Sacramento Kings, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, those were... Obviously, the Nets didn't have a whole lot of incentive to tank, but still, you've got teams that are just kind of playing youngsters down the stretch and that sort of thing once they realize their pick is gone. Now, if the odds do kind of level out a little bit, does that impact, in your mind, trading draft picks at all? Do you think teams will be more hesitant or more willing to part with their picks or maybe change protections? I mean, what kind of ramifications could this have on the trade market?
I think it will mean that it makes draft picks, it makes the teams that are towards the bottom of the league, their draft picks are way more valuable because, it used to be that the clear worst team in the league had a significantly more valuable draft pick to trade than the other teams. But now, the 5 to 7 or 7 worst teams in the NBA could all have similar value for their draft picks when they're trading them. So I think it makes the trading market a lot more interesting. That's for sure.
Right.
It's kind of like it's really like a game theory question of is it more likely or less likely for these to move now? I guess it would probably be that if a team wants to use their draft pick, then they're less likely to make trades now if they're in the bottom half of the bottom half of those lottery teams because they have a really good chance of getting one of those top 3 picks. But if you're a team that is looking to make a trade, it's going to be way easier for you to make a trade now because teams are going to value that pick so much higher than they did before. So a team like Orlando, who was the 6th worst team in the NBA last year, or that's not quite right, but they were in the bottom 6 there in the draft. Yeah. They could have traded their pick for a much larger package than it would have been compared to last year in the old valuation because it wasn't nearly as valuable. So I think it definitely could result in more trades because teams that are looking to trade their picks to get a really good player, I think it'll be way easier for them to do it now.
See, I see that as from covering the NBA, I see that as a positive because trades are always fun for everybody, and I feel like if you can open up trades in any way, then great. I mean, it gives teams a little bit more flexibility. So I'd be in favor of that. I still have some concerns over giving a surefire star to a team that's already pretty good when there's teams that really could use that star. But then again, I mean, maybe if that's going to truly end tanking, I don't know that it will. I think there's still going to be some teams that are going to play the odds as much as they can. But if that can at least lessen tanking, then I think it's something you definitely have to take a look at because here's my thing. And from following the Lakers, from covering the Lakers over the last few years, I can tell you that it is a horrible feeling when you see your team win and you can't feel 100% happy about that. When as a fan, when you're watching your team wins a game and you're going, yeah, our guys played well and they won, but maybe they just hurt their chances of getting a high draft pick. That's not good. I don't think you want that, and I don't like the disconnect between fans and the team. I mean, we had in Los Angeles, we had some fans that were tweeting things at Thomas Robinson, complaining that he was playing too well and that he had helped the team win a game and saying, you're ruining our draft pick and all these, which is ridiculous. But I like having the fans and the players both want their team to win, and having a system that incentivizes tanking doesn't really create that. You get those divergent goals between the fan and the team or the players, and so that's something that I would definitely like to see fixed. I know you probably haven't seen that as much in Boston recently, but what's your take there? Do you think that we need to keep the fans on the same side as the players?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole point of the sport and the whole point of fandom is that the fans are rooting for the players to succeed and they're rooting for them to win. I go back to when I was still a fan back in 2006, 2007 season. So that was the season before KG and Pierce all arrived. And That year was looked at as a very dark year in Celtics history. They were tanking. They shut Pierce down as he was hurt. They lost Tony Allen, who was the guy that replaced Pierce as the exciting young star and was scoring because he tore his ACL on the dunk after a foul. I remember I was right there when it happened. Couldn't believe it. They had Gerald Green and Al Jefferson, who were second. I think they were both second-year players that year. Both second-year players, I believe, who were really taking over. Fans still showed up because in Boston they always do show up, but the attendance thinned out, the passion thinned out. Fans were rooting for them to tank so that they could get a top draft pick and get Greg Oden or Kevin Durant, which I think is what the team wanted as well. And that was the only tanking job that I can remember where fans were still showing up, but it still was a tank job and there's still a loss of passion. For me, that season was very exciting because I was as someone who was super passionate about basketball, I was interested in seeing Al Jefferson develop and seeing Gerald Green develop. At the time, I was modeling my game after Al Jefferson because I was a short, slow, white power forward. So he was my role model for my game. But that was definitely part of it that made it really exciting for me. Was I didn't care about the score at the end of the game. I was just there to watch these guys and see what they can do. That made it really exciting. But the league only cares about the fans being passionate. And by being passionate, they're turning their passion into dollars. And they're buying tickets, and they're buying merch, and all that stuff. So the league wants to fight tanking because they don't want markets drying up and losing attendance and people not showing up. I mean, like, if you look at Atlanta, for instance, they're going to be probably pretty bad this year.
Yep.
That stadium is usually empty, even when they're competitive, which is funny because their team should merit significant fandom, and they're in a city where you figure they would have a huge following. But there's a lot to compete.
Situation there.
Yeah, there's a lot to compete with college sports in that town, I guess. I don't know why, but you would think it would be a huge basketball town. Since it is a big basketball city, but for some reason the Hawks just don't get the attendance poll. I don't know why. But that's a situation where if they're tanking this year, and I wouldn't say tanking because I think Budenholzer would really do that, but if they're not successful this year, that stadium's going to be completely empty.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a huge issue for them because their revenue is going to drop. And everybody else in the league has to pay for it when your revenue drops with the revenue sharing.
Right.
So that's why the league is so incentivized to get rid of tanking because it hurts business. It hurts business a lot. There's a reason why teams like to fight for the playoffs. The owners get millions of dollars in like gate sales and concession sales every single playoff game. So you make a ton of money when you do that. We saw with the cap drop this year because there were so few playoff games. That hurt the league significantly. It hurt the Celtics, for instance, more than anybody. The Celtics had to trade away Avery Bradley because the playoffs were so short and the revenue projection ended up coming pretty short. So it even came in well short of what the Celtics were projecting with all their advanced prediction stuff. So I think that's the thing that the league cares about the most is just preserving ticket sales, making sure that no market is really falling off the map and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's true. Now, I think about when you say that, I think about the Philadelphia market and how they have kind of embraced tanking. And I don't know if they've seen a market drop as well, but I mean, I would assume though that what we've seen happening in Philadelphia with the whole trust the process phase, I'm assuming that would be more of the exception rather than the rule. That if most teams around the league just started tanking and just said, hey, the Warriors are too good or whatever, we're going to build through the draft, and they just kind of gutted their rosters, that their attendance would drop and they would see much more of a negative reaction than maybe even what the 76ers have seen. Although there was a lot of pushback when the 76ers first started their whole tanking crusade here, and I mean they're a big part of why we're even talking about this right now, but it seems like they've managed to keep a solid fan base despite going through the tanking process. And by the way, thank you for trading Avery Bradley because that allowed the Lakers to get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that worked out very well for LA. The funny thing is Philly this year Philly had the number one pick in the draft. And last year was one of the most exciting seasons in franchise history for them because of Embiid and because of T.J. McConnell, who we all agree is the greatest player in NBA history. So that shows you how you could be a team that's losing and get a draft pick, but if you can build it around an exciting center or exciting centerpiece, and you can have an interesting team, then you can still have a passionate fan base. And Boston kind of had that, not the same degree as there wasn't that level of hope. They were kind of in a weird stagnation period. But Philadelphia last year was one of the most exciting team seasons in a long time. the passion for the fans, the hope, them raising raising banners of Sam Hinkie in the middle of like Town Square, whatever it was, and all that. I mean, that was incredible. And their fan base is amazing. They're exciting and they're aggressive, and that's what I love about those Northeast fan bases. They're crazy, but they're they love. But it's true love, even if it's a lot of it is just anger, and they're just trying to get their anger out against somebody.
Angry love.
Yeah, it's like they have all that, like, I live in Boston. It's like there's a ton of just sitting in traffic all day builds this repressive anger that you need to get out, and that's what beer was invented for, and that's why everyone is drunk in Boston. But it comes out in sports because they get hammered, and they go to games, and they tell the refs that they suck, and they tell LeBron he's a bitch, and then they go home and they're happy. So that's what any Northeast curmudgeon wants.